So we're getting better and better at collecting garbage in rich countries, but the smaller pieces we don't really know how to deal with.
Carl Gustaf Lundin, thank you very much for joining Dukascopy TV today. And you're the director of the Global Marine and Polar Program at IUCN. And so first off today, we're going to talk about plastic pollution in the oceans. And so we hear a lot about this, but what is the story from your perspective?
Well, I think we've all known that there's a real issue with what we're putting into the ocean. I think we're increasingly concerned now that we're starting to see that things break down into smaller and smaller pieces. So what we've recently done is looked at where is plastic in, for example, Europe coming from. And it turns out almost half of it is now coming from small pieces of plastic coming in rather than the big garbage. So we're getting better and better at collecting garbage in rich countries, but the smaller pieces we don't really know how to deal with. So one of those sources would be clothing. Most of us have clothing that has some sort of plastic in it, or be it our shoes, or when we wash clothes, for example, it goes out. So almost a third of all the plastic we're putting in right now is coming from this source. Another thing we often don't think of is what's coming from tires. So increasingly our tires also consist of plastic. So maybe as much as 45% of the tires actually is of plastic. And that's now coming out into the marine environment in large amounts. So it's actually quite scary what we're finding.
In the media, in the last year at least, we heard a lot about these microplastics and things in toothpaste and stuff like that, for example. Is that a really big problem?
Well, the good news in some ways is that we got people's attention, and I think we're starting to find solutions here. And in fact, if you're using the product the way you're supposed to use it, you're going to put the plastic in the sea. So people have now realized that we have to find substitutes. It's relatively easy to find substitutes in scrubbers or in toothpaste. You can find other things that actually biodegrade. So we should be able to solve this problem. But it's only maybe 3% of the problem. Most of the rest of the problem actually from these other sources. And right now, neither the car industry or the textile or clothing industry has really woken up to the fact that they have a real issue on their hands.
So let's look at like the human health effects. What are some human health effects that are happening because of this pollution?
Well, in some ways, this is the really scary part because we really don't know what these effects are yet. We have reason to believe now that plastic is coming into our bodies in all kinds of new pathways that we didn't know before. One of them would obviously be through food. Now, recent studies have shown that as much as 80% of mussels, for example, have microplastics in them. But even looking at smaller pieces like nanoplastics, we really don't know. Right now, we don't even have the good models to show how nanoplastics travel through our body. We're probably going to use radioactive markers to see where it goes, but chances are that it actually can go through our membranes, that it can get into our body in all kinds of ways. The other thing with plastics is it actually binds different types of toxins to it. So naturally what we have produced plastic often has 4% additives, and that's maybe 2,000 different types of chemicals. Several of them are toxic to us. But on top of that, you can have other environmental pollutants that are now coming into our bodies as well. So not just the plastic itself, but also what comes with it.
Are we still seeing a big problem with the old favorite, as it were, in plastic bags, plastic shopping bags, stuff like that?
Well, I think it depends on where you are in the world. In some parts of the world, this is a real big issue. We still haven't really stopped people throwing trash out willy-nilly. But in many industrial countries, it's less of an issue compared to the microplastic problem. The good news is the plastic bag problem we really know how to fix. And if we work responsibly with people, we can find a good solution to it. It's harder with these new sources of plastic pollution, which we don't really have the models to deal with yet. And there the industry really needs to look at substitution, looks at new ways of producing it. Also looking at washing machines. I mean, maybe we can actually produce washing machines with filters that filter out all of these plastic things. But, you know, there'll be a lag time before the old washing machines are stopped being used, before the new ones are being produced and actually are functional. And so we have another 10 years maybe of more plastic pollution until we solve this problem.
Usually in situations like this, it takes a hit on industry and money for people to stand up and start doing something about it. What are the implications of this pollution on industry?
Well, I think for some of these industries, you know, it's just the technological modifications. You already have filters on many washing machines, so to put this in is not going to be a huge thing. For the consumer, it means you need to be educated enough so you know how to clean the filter. But again, it's not a huge step to get that going. If you look at the tire industry, clearly it means an adaptation to change their behavior, and that will require them to put some effort into, but it's not insurmountable. I mean, they've already changed the composition of what they produce tires from several times in the past. I'm sure they can do it once they get the demand from the public to solve this problem.
And finally, just looking at education, as you mentioned there, what other steps can we take in educating ourselves and other people on what's going on and the effects it's having?
Well, I think as being responsible consumers, we should always think, how can I limit my footprint? You know, what are the types of consumption that I'm indulging in that I don't really need to do, or that's actually particularly bad for nature? So, you know, read up on it, try to understand a little better what you can do. The other thing, of course, is as we start finding good substitutes, you know, be prepared to pay a little bit of extra for them, because in the long run, it's actually good for you.
Carl, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. And remember, if you like this interview and would like to see more like it, then head over to dukascopy.tv.